Good morning. Joel was mentioning earlier the sense that we pastors have when we think, boy, our people really need to hear this, and then partial crowds and stuff show up. That's not uncommon, to be honest with you. The truth is, in the area of human sexuality, the world has pretty much made the decision, even church-going people have made the decision, that the church has nothing new or fresh to say in the area of human sexuality. And even churchgoers expect that anytime the church opens the topic, all you're going to hear is judgment, don't, and I don't know what else, fear. The world's going to hell, and who's going to do anything about it? And the church has got to find a way back into the middle of these conversations. And I think we'll do it primarily by exegeting the world that we live in better than what we are. Looking at social study that's going on in the world, looking at patterns within culture, looking at the things that are filling counselors' offices these days, and the church beginning to address some of those kind of realities in our current world in such a way that the world begins to nod and say, yeah, you folk do know what's going on. Then that gives us the opportunity to introduce a new and a fresh word into that. So, we're going to start in just a moment with dating and the dating patterns of the youth of our culture these days. But before we do that, I promised last night we would start with any questions that you might have out of last night. And this morning, in case you weren't here last night, we're going to deal with if dating is dead, what's next? Then we're going to spend just a few minutes on pornography, and then we're going to go immediately from there to homosexuality, gender identities, and a lot of the labels of LGBTQI, all that. And if we have any time left, we might spend a little time on gender and what it means, transgendered persons, intersex, and some of that. So that's kind of the morning that's in front of us. Now, this might sound like the easy, oh yeah. The truth is, I think what I'm about to talk about is going to have a larger detrimental impact on the American family and human sexuality than homosexuality ever will. Homosexuality is relegated to a 4 to 5%, I think at best, some folks say 10%, of the American population. And while it is a serious issue that we're going to deal with, I think the dating issue is even stronger. Scott Stanley, in his work there out of the University of Denver, has identified attachment anxiety disorder as a significant uptick in the younger generation that's coming through. It's that sense that to be bound to another person in some kind of committed way is scary for them. And so out of that being afraid of that, there is this standing somewhat loosely in relationships. Scott calls this sliding versus deciding. Sliding into relationships instead of deciding about relationships. The attachment anxiety comes out of a generation of kids who've grown up in families where the divorce rate is where it is, but even the non-divorce rate of families in which abuse is occurring and abuse of every kind is occurring. These kids are watching these marriages and they're afraid of being in some of those kinds of relationships again, and that just continues to increase. We're seeing more and more single parenting that's happening, and so within the context of that, they've experienced some level of major failure in a relationship, but they're watching that, and there's this fear. So what's happening is, I was I was sitting at a cafeteria table at Trevecca a few years ago, and it was a group of students that were there, and one of the students said to one of the other students, the guy says to her, he says, hey, you want to hang out with me at such and such? And she looked back at him and she said, is this a date? Nobody's asking that question anymore. Nobody's asking for some kind of definition on it. Now, The generation ahead of this, there were very clear rituals around dating. And I would pick up a telephone. That's something with a cord attached to it that has and I would call Denise in her dorm, which had only one telephone at the end of the hallway, so everybody knew who was calling for who. And I would ask her to go to a specific place to do a specific thing at a specific time with me. And I would pick her up and we would go and we would do that thing, and then I would bring her back to the dorm and I would hope for a kiss at the end of the evening to demonstrate that this had been a remarkable time together. And then she would go back into the dorm and she would dissect the date with all of her roommates, and one of them would tell me the next day whether I had a chance of a future date or not. So and then these kind of events led to symbolic things of a ring or a jacket or a sweater or you exchange something that physically traveled with the other person, so that there is this sense of you have a part of me and I have a part of you. And then following that, there's this commitment. Are we steady? Are we engaged? Are we what? So there was a very clear pathway of defining where the relationship was. Now, what students are saying to me these days is, especially women, they're just saying, these guys don't know how to define what the relationship is, and we're just trying to figure it out, and we don't know. And there's this nebulous, we're hanging out together, and we're sort of, even Facebook, if you look at Facebook these days, there is a dramatic decline since Facebook has, I saw the number the other day, it's unbelievable, like 50 or 60 categories of relationship that you can choose from to declare on Facebook what kind of relationship you're in. Well, the number of people that are doing that are declining dramatically on Facebook, because they're basically saying we don't know what kind of relationship that we are in. The hookup culture that is happening now, where it's basically sex is recreational and you hook up with one another either at a party somewhere and then head to a bedroom, or you just meet in each other's dorm room or whatever you do. The hookup culture that is occurring is a culture that has no relational definition connected to it in any way. So what Scott Stanley is saying is the rituals that cause people to define what a relationship is are disappearing at such a concerning rate that the pathway to what we would call marriage is being destroyed in the process, which is leading, as you might guess, to a massive uptick in cohabitation. So rather than are we dating? Are we committed to one another? Are you dating other people? Am I dating other people? Rather than those kind of defining moments in relationships, it's you want to move in. And so the uptick of that continues to happen. As the uptick of that continues to happen, if you think we've seen out of wedlock births being high so far, you hadn't seen anything yet. That is the next tidal wave to hit. And when you begin to see all of these single moms with children that are born out of cohabiting relationships, and you begin to see the social studies that are saying that cohabitation is not a dependent predictor of marriage. Matter of fact, Scott's research is very solid, and it shows how the conflict within cohabitation is massively more than the conflict within marriage. The predictability of long-term relationship is almost nothing compared to marriage. But what's happening is children are being born into this, which means we are now in the process of creating the new poor of the country that we live in, which is the mother who has small children and has no support and is simply trying to figure out a way to work and pay for this child and support this child. And in a country that if we think we've needed government support before to support the poor, it's about to just turn a corner as the avalanche comes all the way down the hill. And this all goes back to The dating patterns. Those of you that are around educational institutions, you'll understand this well. What we're beginning to see now is a significant increase in the number of college students that change their major once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. And what's happening is it's a generation that doesn't know how to decide, doesn't simply know how to make a determination about what it is they want to do. So they'll come in and I'm going to major in this, but then I start my gen ed classes and, I really like this psychology professor over here. So because I'm infatuated with the psychology professor, I change my major to that, and I take about a semester of that, and then I go, I don't want to do this. And then all of a sudden, I like the biology professor, and I've changed my major again. And before you know it, here they are 4, 5, 6 years in college, and they've collected all of this stuff, but there is no pathway toward a definitive career. This is what's happening in the dating processes that's happening. So I think the youth groups of the churches of today have got to figure out a way. Now, you don't have to make it sound archaic and old, like you first must date, then you do this, and then you do this. But we've got to help teenagers know how, face to face, with the persons that they are interested in, we've got to help teenagers know how to use the kind of language that defines where this relationship is. How I feel about you, how you feel about me, where we are as two people together, and how that increases and grows in commitment all the way up to the point of marriage. Junior high and senior high guys are terrified to define a relationship. They are terrified to do that at this point. And they need the skills of a loving church to be able to come around them and help them. Girls are wanting some kind of definition on the relationship that they have. Most of them are. So there's a sense of what's going on is leaving a lot of people in no man's land that is not very good at all. And it's why the hookup culture and recreational sex has hit the youth years in as strong of a way as it can. The occurrence of sexual intercourse among barely into puberty teenagers is rising at a dramatic rate because there is no other definition other than physical recreation that's going on with this. And apart from defined relationships and what commitment looks like at key places along the way, we're leaving our youth in this time period. See if I can find the quote I've got here in my book about this. Okay. Here it is. Surveys tell us that over 90% of college students want to get married, and puberty is arriving earlier than ever. This combination of strong sexual desire, attachment anxiety, and the desire to be married is the perfect storm for our students to fall into the traps of sexual exploration very early in their life without the accompanying capacity of knowing how to commit to another person. There's a wonderful book that I would recommend by Laura Sessions Stepp. It's called Unhooked: How Young Women Pursue Sex, Delay Love, and Lose at Both. It's a really, really good book. In terms of resources that you might be looking for, I've got a little card. I've got a few of them over here. This is how you can order most of what I'm talking about as an ebook. It's not printed as hard copy, but Human Sexuality 2, a primer for Christians, and this chapter on dating is in there, and all of the resources from Dr. Stanley and Laura and some of those folk on dating are there. So that's kind of dating, and I'll try to get through that as quick as. Let's talk about that one for a minute. What are you seeing in the lives of the teens in your homes, in your church? What are your grandkids, your kids, or teens that are here? Is that anywhere close to what's happening in your high schools or in the social media has made a young generation very afraid to be in a relationship because the other person can narrate what's happening in that relationship in a way that can be quickly shaming or embarrassing. And there's not a ritual for breakup in social media. I mean, do you defriend the person? Or do you stalk them and make their life miserable because they treated you in a particular way? So there is a quick and instant way of shaming in relationships, which is a part of the anxiety, the attachment anxiety that is there. You know, I'm afraid to be too vulnerable with you because this is going to get played out on Facebook or Snapchat or, you know, it's somehow, you know, I'm going to be put out there in a way that I can't fully defend myself in front of our friends. And I can't get too deep into this or it'll take us too long. These relationships that begin to help me realize there is something sacred about a relationship in which things might be shared with one another that you would like to process only with this person and not with the whole wide world. But now a younger generation understands themselves traveling in a network of friendships on social media together. So we're all going here together. So how do I have this in the middle of this? Well, I'm afraid, and if I'm too attached to you and we are sharing in these kind of ways together, does that suddenly get exported into all of these ways? And it's a part of what makes a younger generation quite anxious about the relationship they're having. We're afraid of shame. We're deeply afraid of shame in the context of these relationships. Our youth pastors, boy, I tell you, our people who work with our youth these days, they need to be some of the best educated and trained people we have, because most of what is happening in human sexuality starts very, very early. And if we do not have the kind of children and youth pastors that are able to guide our students in that direction. I had a wonderful lunch this week with Margaret, you call her Maggie, I think, your sister, and a group of children's pastors on the district who are working with tough issues even at the children's level. Parent comes and says, my child is a boy but believes he is a girl and will dress like a girl, and I would like for you to treat him like a girl and allow him to use the girls' restroom. And, you know, what does a children's pastor do with those kinds of issues that are happening? So it's being pushed back. The human sexuality things that are not being discussed by people the average age of those of us in this room, they're being determined by our children and our teens in the context of questions that are being asked of them. So that's why it's important. Any other questions or comments on dating you want to throw out there?
It seems that there's slow, gradual change, and then there's qualitative shifts.
Yeah.
And we're in a time of a qualitative shift where we as parents have no idea how to navigate the social media landscape to help guide kids, because it wasn't our lived experience, and it's foreign.
Yeah.
So there's a real challenge to even figure out how to help
Yeah.
the younger generation navigate that.
Yeah, if you're a parent, I mean, you have just got to go back to school. I'm driving along a few weeks ago, and my 10-year-old grandson is explaining to his 5-year-old brother what a transgendered person is. And I'm just listening to it in the back seat. And a little later, I said to Gray, the 10-year-old, I said, hey, who told you about transgendered? He said, oh, we talk about it on the bus all the time. And I'm realizing, you know, what parent of a 10-year-old has even thought about sitting down with their child and having a discussion of that kind of terminology that they might hear in the context of a bus ride home. 10 years old. I mean, when I was 10 years old, I mean, all I wanted was bubble gum and baseball cards. So parents, educate yourself. This is there is a qualitative shift. This is not the gradual thing that we have seen. There is a shifting of the issue of human sexuality, and the government has not helped us by moving in and making determinations about bathrooms and pronouns by which children might be addressed. And the government has not helped us at all by basically saying, whatever anybody says they are, you have to align yourself to that particular reality. What it basically means is anybody can demand any institution to do whatever they insist they do because they understand themselves in a certain way. The medical field, imagine that happening in the medical field, where people went in and said, no, I don't have leukemia, I have this, and you must treat me for what I declare to you I have. I mean, doctors would just say, that's nuts. It's nuts. Said, we will treat you to bring you to health as we understand it, not allow you to come in and tell us what prescriptions we have to write for you because you have self-diagnosed yourself. We no longer live in a world. Individualism has risen to the point that anyone can declare about themselves anything that they want, and suddenly it is the responsibility of the world around them to adjust to that. That's going to be a world like we've never seen before, but that's kind of where we are. Good? Okay, let's talk about pornography for just a few minutes. I mean, the church, people are pretty well used to the church just saying, don't, it's wrong. But we've really not made a compelling case about what is happening in the brain of a person who practices the use of pornography consistently. And the research is beginning to be very, very strong in terms of what is happening in the process of this. I'll try to set it in a theological context. That which leads a person to move toward pornography is what I would call a human desire. It is a desire for intimacy. It's a desire for the other. And that person has been deceived to actually believe that legitimate human desire can be met through the objectification of another human being into some art or form of pornography that might be there. And so what happens is there are centers in the brain that are triggered with the release of hormones in the use of pornography, which seems to say, yes, you have satisfied this legitimate human desire you have in this process, but it is the same brain pattern that is highly addictive and moves people toward all kinds of addictions that are out there. The church, I think, has made a huge mistake of believing that increasing someone's willpower is the way to get at this. It's not. It's really not. Being in college settings for about the last 40 years of my life now, and working with students, and just sitting listening to college counselors that work in the area of pornography quite a bit with a college generation, which has normalized it. I mean, I'm just here to tell you, students in college these days go, what's the big deal? But in working with them, there is a sense in which the normalization of this is harming the capacity of a human being to have loving relationships with other human beings in significant ways. So the church needs to find a way to say, pornography is not wrong because you're looking at a naked body or you're observing the sexual acts of other people in video, magazine, whatever. Pornography is wrong because something is happening to you as a human being that is crippling your capacity to be a loving, respectful, regarding human being toward other persons. Until we bring people to the point of recognizing the massive self-damage they're doing in the use of pornography, we're going to have a hard time talking about it. What has to happen is human desiring has to be reformatted. Human craving has to be re-educated. Human reaching has to find some redemption in it. There's a couple of little pieces here I wanted to read. When a man mentally manipulates a woman in the pornographic studio of his mind, he is doing what Adam learned to do, to treat the woman as an object. Lust begins in the most potent sex organ of them all, the human mind. Lust first learns to imagine. It owns someone sexually in the thoughts. It wants what isn't ours, but acts as if it is. Lust purchases people for consumption. It is a cheap appeasement of legitimate sexual desire. We can lust without talking to a person, touching a person, knowing a person. And we can lust while appearing to be nice, normal, or even religious. It requires only that we open a studio in our mind where people come and go under our power. There's no shortage of material. The internet, movie channels without restrictions, mail-order magazines, the local video store. Lust asks only for one thing: a numbing of the internal ache for the other. And it never says, "I've had enough." Like drinking salt water to quench a thirst, it poisons the appetite that it intends to quench. Pornography services our most dignified desire for relationship in the most impersonal way. It views people as little more than plumbing. Let me read that last two sentences. This is why pornography is so destructive. Pornography services our most dignified desire for relationship in the most impersonal way. This is taking the human being who, in the image of God, is created with a desire for the other. And it's taking that legitimate God-given desire, which is deep in all of us, this desire to be known, to touch, to experience human intimacy, to have conversations that make me feel valued, to have people who truly listen to me and know me, to feel connected, not alone. It takes that about us, which is so deeply human. It's how God created us. It's part of the image of God in us. It takes that and it seeks to appease that in a way that does not actually connect us or make us known or cause us to feel loved. And in the process of that, the brain is getting this chemical bath in the process of using pornography that somehow tells us we have satisfied our humanity. And yet, those who are captivated by pornography are moving toward loneliness in all kinds of different levels. This is a place where I think the church needs to address it, not because this is a gross evil and people just need to stop. We need to address it because the lives of human beings are being destroyed by the practice of pornography in ways that are recoverable. But this is not a trip to the altar. This is not a, man, you just need to have willpower. This is not women who finally say, we're going to stop doing this. This is people asking the question, what does it mean for me to be most fully human? What does it mean for me to be in right relationships with other persons? If I rehearse the art of objectifying other human being by using them impersonally long enough, I become the kind of person that does not have the capacity for great relationships. You've seen this in other ways. Let's take a professional sports team who is owned by, managed by, and coached by a person who only cares about winning and losing. That is the only thing that matters to them. And they've had a series of players come through. And I mean, the first injury that this player has, they're out, they're gone, they're done. The way they relate to them causes that player to feel, I don't mean anything to you. I'm only here, because I can hit or I can catch. And what happens is the capacity of that team to bond eventually just dismantles because they know that they are being used They understand that. They see clearly. I don't mean anything to this person, and I have no relationship. What happens to that team owner or that manager is the further they go into this practice, the more lonely they become because nobody gives a rip about them. And they give a rip about no one else. And they practice that to the degree that they feel the same way about the people they buy their groceries from, their gas from, their cars from. And what happens is there's a relational death that occurs in the context of that kind of being. Pornography is doing that to people. It is making people lonely, relationless, and harming their ability to have the kind of vibrant relationships that are there. And the church ought to be saying, we love you too much. We love our neighbor too much to let this happen without us raising a flag and saying, we care about you. We want you to be a person that has a lot of great friendships. We want you to be the kind of person who could enter a marriage. I haven't been in the context of marital counseling for about 12 or 13 years now. In college presidencies, you're not in the same place you are in pastoral relationships. But I'm telling you, the last decade of my pastoral ministry, the number of women that would say in the context of marital counseling, I feel like all I am is a person that my husband expects to become their pornography star in our bedroom to replicate what he's been seeing here. And I feel cheap and used and unloved. I began to hear that pattern occur. Now, what's happened? Here's a person who has loved and married a person, but the practice of pornography has taught them how to objectify this person that they're committed to, such that this person becomes an object of their twisted fantasies here in the context of their relationship. And this person believes this is love, while this person is saying, I feel cheap and I feel used and I feel unloved in the context of that. Do you see the death of a relationship that's beginning to occur in this very practice? That's what's happening. So you take those who are not married, take a whole generation of junior high kids, high school kids, college kids, young adults, take a generation of 10 to 30, and you dump enough pornography into their lives, the ability of that group of people to have the kind of life-forming, rich relationships, marriages going forward is going to be so dramatically crippled that you're going to see massive loneliness. I believe we're going to see more and more suicide as a result of that. A part of the opioid crisis that we're seeing now is this is a way to numb the pain of this kind of loneliness that happens, and that nobody loves me, nobody cares for me, and therefore, I'm moving out into that. The pornography is the beginning of numbing myself out to my own humanity, my own desire for relationship. I tried to find some kind of intimacy that made me feel alive, but I became addicted to objectifying other people in that. So that's pornography in as quick of a summary as I can give. You want to talk about that one for a few minutes, and then we'll take a restroom break maybe, and then we'll come back and dive into the topics of homosexuality, gay marriage, and some of those issues. Comments or questions?
So how does the church start to have discussions with kids? I mean, you made the point about starting out with youth groups and stuff, but how would the church have conversations with younger kids when the parents probably aren't going to have those discussions?
Yeah. I certainly don't believe the church can ever replace what is the responsibility of parents in the home. And so I think the church's first stab, I try to say this everywhere I go, if I'm hiring a youth pastor, I'm actually, the number one criteria of that is, can this person have a relationship with the parents of the church who have teenagers, first and foremost? Is this a person who will be respected in the eyes of those parents to become their coach, their friend, and helping them know what they might do? But the times that I've tried this, I've been amazed at how well it went. I preached in January at Nashville First Church of the Nazarene and did the very sermon that I'll preach to you guys in the morning. And then that night, they had a whole church discussion. They had from junior high to senior adults in a room. I bet we had 200 people that were crammed into that room. And the youth group was there, and the senior adult group was there, and everybody in between was there. And they just handed out sheets of paper, and people wrote questions on them, and I just stood up and answered them. It was riveting. I mean, we had more fun that night. You had all the generations together, and we're talking about all the kind of stuff we're talking about here. And there were what I would call innocent 11-year-old questions that were part of that, and there were very complex and difficult ethical questions that were a part of that. And yet, for about an hour and a half, the church had a conversation about these kinds of things. And I watched this mingling of the generations begin to happen in that room. And, you know, a 70-year-old former or retired pastor goes over to a 16-year-old guy and says, "I really appreciated the question that you had asked in that." And I started seeing a conversation happen in a very honest and natural way in the context of a church. I think we have to create more of those so that across generational lines there begins to be this expression. Teenagers need to know and experience in their local church that the people who attend my church care about these kinds of things and actually are clued in on these kinds of things. I do think what you're doing here is critically important, and to find ways that there are classes and groups. Youth ministry is really tough work these days. I'm telling you, there's hardly a youth group of any size in America that there are not kids that have come out of the closet, that there are not kids that have some gender confusion going on in their life. It's the reality of where youth groups are in this particular time. And we've got to find a way that we address these kind of things there. So, and the book I wrote was it's kind of a shot. I call it A Primer for Christians. It's basically where parents can start and where churches can start having conversations about some of the key issues that are there. And we really need to be talking about the issue of pornography. I think that plus the whole anxiety attachment disorder of the 10 to 30-year-olds, that generation, there's a massive destructive payload coming down the road with what's happening there.